simple terms, I support governments all across the world as they seek to understand and respond to one of the fastest growing innovations of our time, which is blockchain and digital assets, and helping to shape their policy response to those technology developments. The flip side of the work that I do is working with industry, so working with private sector, not just to track what those latest tech developments are, but to help them understand, the policy objectives that governments are seeking to achieve with regulations, as well as to help reimagine what effective tools look like for regulation, for supervision, and for compliance in this space. The type of digital assets that people are most familiar with are things like cryptocurrencies, things like NFTs, and I've seen a lot about them in the news lately. And those are just types of digital assets, but they're probably the types that people are most familiar with. Things like Bitcoin, things like Ethereum. Definitely not. Look, when I was going through high school, this field was not even in existence. And like many people when I was younger, when I was a child, I wanted to be an astronaut. When I was at high school, I worked out that although I really liked maths, science was not particularly compatible with my brain. So that then led me to think about instead being a lawyer. And then, of all things, I became a tax lawyer, which was a big surprise to me. But I also discovered that I really, really loved it. And I became a tax lawyer working for government in Australia. And from there, got more involved, less with sort of cases day to day and more on the sort of policy side, sort of what is the vision, what's the role of tax in society, and how do we tax different things. And tax is a really foundational part of the relationship between governments and communities. That took me overseas to work with the OECD, and I was there for 12 years. And during that time, I just became more interested in technology, at how technology was changing the world that we live in. First, I was interested from a tax perspective, and then I just became more interested in sort of the broader space of technology policy. At this time, cryptocurrencies were starting to get more and more attention. I started to learn a bit about them, think about them from a tax perspective, and then ultimately think about them from a much broader perspective, and ended up setting up and running the Blockchain Policy Center at the OECD. And here I am sort of 5 years later into this space, very much surprised to have ended up here, but very happy to as well. I think the one that sort of, comes up most frequently is, for example, in relation to sort of illicit activity in all its forms, but including, for example, money laundering or ransomware, which are areas where we've seen sort of, particularly in ransomware, sort of grow over time and is of increasingly concerns to governments, but also for everyone from sort of individuals to large corporations who might be hit by a ransomware attack. And thinking about, how to make sure that this technology, can't be used to facilitate, those sorts of attacks, and can't be used and where, ransom are paid, to actually be able to trace the funds to their destination, really understand, who's shifting that money. And so those are, that's one area where, we have to think about, well, how can we make sure and how can we prevent and mitigate, that from happening to the greatest extent possible. That, the particular sort of digital asset space, blockchain, distributed ledger technology, it's a very exciting and dynamic field, and it's also a very young field. And that means that even the most experienced people only have sort of 10, 13 years experience in it. And so that means even if you're relatively young, there's actually a huge opportunity to quickly become an expert in a particular area and kind of contribute in a way and at a level that you that in other fields might take, a whole career of sort of 40 years of work to get to that same level. This is a space which is still very much evolving, and so your opportunity to contribute is relatively high as an individual.